I discovered my wife was planning to humiliate me on a Tuesday afternoon, which seemed fitting since Tuesdays had always been our worst day for pretending everything was still fine. The bathroom door hung open just enough that her voice carried through clearly, almost like she wanted me to hear what she really thought of the man she'd married 8 years ago.
He's definitely going to confess his feelings tonight at Meridian.
I stood frozen in our hallway with my briefcase still gripped tightly in one hand, wondering if I should announce my presence or just keep listening to what came next from her lips.
He's been dropping obvious hints all week long, buying flowers, acting extra attentive. And tonight he booked that expensive place where all the finance types show off their wealth.
Her laugh carried that sharp edge I'd been hearing more frequently lately, the sound of someone who'd already decided how a story would end before the other person even started speaking.
I'm gonna let him order the wine, let him get nervous and sweaty, and when he finally says his pathetic speech, I'll reject him in front of everyone there at the restaurant.
The friend on the other end must have asked something because my wife paused for a moment, and I could hear water running, followed by the precise click of a compact snapping shut tight.
Of course he'll pay for the entire meal, he always does, and honestly that's the only reason I'm bothering to show up, because watching him process public rejection will be priceless.
I set my briefcase down slowly and carefully on the floor, the way you handle something fragile when your hands aren't quite steady and your brain is racing to catch up with reality. I'd worked in logistics coordination for 15 years straight without a break, which meant I understood timing and patterns and pressure points and exactly how to move things discreetly. My wife had started treating me like furniture about 2 years ago, something functional that stayed in place and didn't require maintenance or attention beyond the most basic acknowledgement. I picked up my briefcase again and walked quietly to our bedroom, where I kept a small safe hidden behind a row of books that nobody ever touched because reading had become pretend. Inside that safe was documentation I'd been quietly collecting for 3 months now, not because I'd planned anything specific, but because work patterns had trained me to notice irregularities. She'd come home late exactly 17 times since February started, always with explanations that sounded carefully rehearsed, always with a phone that suddenly needed charging immediately. The credit card statements showed restaurant charges in neighborhoods she claimed never to visit, plus hotel bookings under her name on nights she said she attended conferences that didn't exist. I sat down on the edge of our bed and thought carefully about the restaurant reservation tonight, the plan she'd just described, the performance she wanted to stage for her assembled audience. I spent the rest of that afternoon drafting something short on a single piece of paper, the kind of message that doesn't need any explanation because the words themselves do all the required work. At exactly 6:30 that evening, I put on the Navy suit, the one that made me look like every other forgettable husband in expensive restaurants across the city where we used to dine. Meridian was exactly the kind of place where people went to be seen, rather than to actually eat anything, all glass and dim lighting, and waiters who moved like performing delicate surgery. I arrived at precisely 7 o'clock, which my wife would naturally interpret as eagerness or maybe even desperation, and that misunderstanding was the foundation for everything about to happen. She was already seated at a corner table, positioned perfectly where she'd have a clear view of the entire room and everyone in it would have a view of whatever performance she had planned. Her friends Jessica and Claire sat 2 tables over, pretending to be on their own dinner date, but clearly positioned as witness anchors for whatever public moment was coming very soon.
You're late.
My wife said the exact moment I sat down, even though I was precisely on time, because starting with a small lie was how she liked to set the emotional temperature lately. I didn't bother correcting her statement at all, just smiled the way she expected me to smile, the way a man who didn't know what was coming would smile at his wife across a white tablecloth.
I went ahead and ordered wine already,
she continued while gesturing to a bottle that probably cost more than our monthly utilities, something she knew I'd see on the credit card statement.
You look nervous tonight.
I was definitely nervous, but not for the reasons she thought. Not because I was building courage to confess something romantic, but because timing was absolutely critical right now.
I wanted to talk about something important.
Which was completely true, and I watched her eyes light up slightly because those words matched the script she'd already written in her head. She glanced briefly at her friend's table, a quick eye contact that clearly said, "Get ready," and I noticed Claire already had her phone positioned like she was ready to capture video evidence.
Before you say anything else, I need to give you this first, because I think it explains things better than I could say out loud.
I pulled a small envelope from my jacket pocket, plain white and sealed, with her name written across the front. In my normal handwriting that she'd recognize as mine without any doubt. Her expression shifted noticeably, curiosity mixing with suspicion, because this wasn't part of the script she'd prepared, and improvisation had never been her strongest skill in any context.
What exactly is this?
Read it when you get home tonight.
I didn't look back at her face, didn't check to see how Jessica and Claire were reacting to this unexpected development. Just walked straight to the exit where my car was parked deliberately. My phone started buzzing violently before I even made it home, which meant she'd opened the envelope in the restaurant despite my specific instructions. Probably couldn't resist her audience. I didn't answer any calls, just drove my normal route, parked in my normal spot, went into the apartment that would probably be empty for a while as she processed what she'd just read. The note had been simple, just 2 sentences that any lawyer would confirm were completely legal and any husband would confirm were completely devastating to receive in a public place. I know about Derek and the apartment on Wilson Street where you've been spending Thursday evenings, and I also know about the restaurant plan you described to Jessica this afternoon today. I'm filing for legal separation tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp, and I've already contacted an attorney who specializes in documenting infidelity cases for divorce proceedings. The calls kept coming relentlessly, first from her, then from Jessica, then from Claire, then from numbers I didn't recognize, probably other friends she'd recruited to help manage the crisis. Around 11 that night, she came home, and I could hear her in the entryway breathing hard like she'd been running or crying or both at once, neither of which I particularly cared about.
We need to talk right now. How long have you known about this?
She asked while sitting down across from me without being invited.
3 months.
3 months was when I started documenting everything instead of pretending I didn't notice the patterns. She flinched slightly, doing the math in her head, realizing how many times she'd lied directly to my face while I already knew the truth and just let her keep talking without stopping.
Derek means absolutely nothing to me.
I held up my hand to stop her, not aggressively, just firmly, the way you stop a conversation that's already over before the other person realizes they're just talking to themselves now. She didn't leave that night, which surprised me. Instead, she camped out in the living room, making phone calls to people I could hear through the walls she thought were soundproof, but weren't. By morning, the story had shifted noticeably. I could tell by the way she was talking. Suddenly, I was controlling and jealous and paranoid, making things up to justify my own insecurities. Derek called me around 10 in the morning, which was bold, and I almost admired the confidence it took to dial the number of the husband you'd been helping someone cheat on for months.
We should talk man-to-man about this.
There's absolutely nothing to discuss.
I told him and hung up before he could launch into whatever speech he'd prepared about feelings and complexity. The separation papers were filed by noon, which made it real in a way that my wife hadn't fully processed yet, probably because she'd expected negotiations or begging to come first. Her mother called me that afternoon, which meant my wife had escalated to family support.
I overheard her in the bathroom describing her plan to reject me publicly at the restaurant. The envelope was a response, not an initiation.
I didn't know about that part.
Her mother finally said, and her voice had changed from accusatory to something closer to disappointment. I found out about the video on Thursday when my brother called, asking if I'd seen what was circulating on social media platforms where people shared content they probably shouldn't share. Someone at the restaurant had filmed the moment I handed over the envelope, then my wife opening it at the table, then her face as she read what was inside and realized everything had backfired. The video had been edited with captions speculating about what the note said, turning our private destruction into entertainment for people who didn't know us and didn't need to know us. My wife was devastated by this in a way she hadn't been devastated by the actual separation, because now strangers were involved and narrative control had been lost to algorithms and sharing. Derek distanced himself immediately. I knew because mutual acquaintances started telling me they'd seen him posting about focusing on himself and taking time to reassess his priorities online. The video kept spreading rapidly, and my wife's carefully constructed social image started cracking under the weight of public opinion that didn't care about her version of events at all. Claire, who'd been positioned as witness anchor that night, apparently felt guilty about filming and started telling people the full context, including the overheard plan to reject me publicly. This changed the narrative entirely. Suddenly, I wasn't the villain in the story anymore. I was the husband who'd defended himself against planned humiliation, and public opinion shifted. Derek's name came up in comments. People started connecting dots, and suddenly their relationship wasn't a private affair anymore, but a public scandal people were analyzing with enthusiasm. I watched all of this happen from a distance, not participating, not commenting, just observing as the revenge I'd planned accidentally became something much larger than I'd originally intended. The final confrontation happened in a parking garage on a Sunday morning when she'd asked to meet me to return some of my things she'd found while packing up her belongings completely.
I didn't think you'd actually go through with it.
She said, while handing me a box of books and old equipment. I took the box without responding immediately, because there wasn't anything left to say that wouldn't just be repeating conversations we'd already had in different variations before this moment.
Derek won't return my calls anymore.
That was always going to happen eventually.
She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time, really seeing me, not the convenient husband or the background figure, but the actual person who'd been watching and planning quietly.
You knew I'd lose everything.
And it wasn't a question, more like a realization she'd arrived at too late to change anything that had already been set in motion and couldn't be stopped. I walked to my car, put the box in the trunk, and drove away without looking back at her standing in that parking garage, probably waiting for something more dramatic or final to happen. The video was still circulating online, probably would be for months, a permanent record of the moment someone's plan backfired spectacularly in front of witnesses they'd invited to watch victory. She'd wanted a performance that night at Meridian, wanted an audience and a moment and a story she could tell about the husband who wasn't enough for her complicated, sophisticated life. Instead, she got a different story, one where the quiet logistics coordinator who she'd stopped noticing years ago had noticed everything and waited patiently for exactly the right moment to respond. The envelope had been simple, just words on paper, but it had done exactly what I'd needed it to do, which was shift power in a situation where I'd been losing power slowly over time. Derek had disappeared from her life the same way he'd probably disappeared from other people's lives when situations got complicated, because men like him only stayed when staying was convenient. The story was over, the revenge was complete, not because anyone went to prison or lost everything financially, but because she'd lost control of her own narrative in front of everyone watching. She'd assembled an audience to watch me fail publicly, and instead they'd watched her lose everything she valued, which was reputation and control and the ability to tell her story her way. That was enough for me, more than enough. Because revenge isn't really about destruction at all. It's about showing someone who underestimated you that they made a fundamental mistake. The envelope had contained just 2 sentences, but those sentences had been enough to destroy the performance she'd planned and replace it with a different performance where I controlled everything. I'd shown her that quiet people aren't weak, they're just selective about when they speak, and that patience isn't passivity, it's strategy, and underestimating someone is a mistake. Sometimes the best revenge isn't violence or public humiliation, it's simply showing someone that you saw them clearly the whole time and you were waiting for the right moment to reveal it. She'd thought I was weak, predictable, someone who would beg and plead and make a scene she could use to justify her own actions, but I'd shown her something entirely different instead. I'd shown her that quiet people aren't weak at all, they're just selective about when they speak, and that patience isn't passivity but strategy, and underestimating someone is dangerous. The parking garage was empty now, just me and my car and the box of belongings that represented 8 years of a marriage that had ended the moment she decided I wasn't worth basic respect. Her friends had scattered too, once the social cost of association became higher than the entertainment value of being close to drama they could gossip about safely from protected distance. Sometimes I thought about that bathroom door being slightly open, about hearing her voice planning my humiliation, about the choice I'd made to show up anyway instead of running from confrontation. If she'd closed the door completely, I might never have known, might have walked into that restaurant unprepared, might have given her exactly the performance she wanted for her assembled audience. But she hadn't closed the door, and that small oversight had changed everything, had given me the information I needed to plan a different ending than the one she'd written in advance.